preventive in nature. It does not wait until a child is in crisis. It recognizes that early intervention, stigma education, and social connectedness can make a meaningful difference in a young person's life. By teaching students healthy coping strategies, problem-solving skills, and the importance of supportive school and home environments, we're giving them tools that they can carry for a lifetime. Colleagues, this measure is not about adding another burden to our schools. It is about strengthening the foundation of student success. It is about giving educators a framework to address an issue they are already seeing in classrooms every single day. It's about helping our children know that mental health is health, that asking for help is not a weakness, and that every student deserves to feel seen, supported, and empowered.
Dr. Yasmin Hall.
Good afternoon, Chairman Valley, Vice Chair Lewis, members of the Committee on Education and Workforce Development, Senator Milton Potter, distinguished office officials, and members of the 36th Legislature and the Virgin Islands community, as well as the viewers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today in support of Bill number 36-0133, legislation that would establish mental health education and instruction within our schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. My name is Dr. YASSIN Hall. I'm a proud Virgin Islander, mental health advocate, educator, author, and motivational speaker. This bill is not just policy for me. This is personal. This is survival. This is generational healing. I come before you as someone who grew up in a household impacted by untreated mental illness. Both of my parents suffered from mental health conditions that were never properly addressed in time. Most notably, my mother, who was later diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. At the age of 12, during a major mental health episode, my mother attempted to take my young life. What made that experience even more devastating was the complete lack of mental health systems available for the Virgin Islands at that time. There was little to no trauma support for children like me. There were virtually no mental health facilities. There was no school mental health counselors available to students. From my firsthand experience, after my mother's psychiatric episode, she was brought back into the home almost immediately without long-term treatment, family stabilization, and sufficient support systems in place. As a child, I felt traumatized, vulnerable, and forced to continue living in fear that the violence could happen again. For years, I carried that pain in silence. That silence later became my purpose. I wrote the book, Journey Untold, My Mother's Struggle with Mental Illness, because I knew that there were countless Virgin Islands families, just like myself, silently suffering the same way I did. I wanted to humanize mental illness and break the stigma that has existed in our culture for generations. Following the release of my book on tour, I launched the Ending the Stigma USVI campaign in 2015. When I traveled throughout the territory speaking directly to students about mental health, trauma, suicide prevention, stigma, and emotional wellness. I spoke at Charlotte Amalie High School, Ivana Eudora-Ken High School, Adelita Conquine Junior High School, Arthur A. Richards Junior High School, Julius Sprouse Schools, and other schools throughout the Virgin Islands. What I witnessed firsthand broke my heart. At Adelita Conquine Junior High School on St. Thomas, which was my alma mater at Wayne Aspinall when I was 12, I was surprised by how aware many of the students already were of mental illness around them. Students openly described behaviors such as they witnessed on the streets and asked questions such as, what kind of mental illness does that person have? Others described behaviors happening inside their own homes and wondered if they were witnessing mental illness. On St. John, students were less exposed to severe mental illness in public settings compared to St. Thomas and St. Croix, but many still asked questions related to PTSD, depression, trauma, and emotional suffering within families and communities. In my opinion, St. Croix appeared to be the most heavily impacted. What we witnessed there forced us to stop after 2 classroom sessions because it became too emotionally overwhelming. We realized that we could not continue opening children's trauma and emotions without having adequate systems in place to help them afterwards. The students were afraid to raise their hands publicly and speak about what they experienced. Instead, the students wanted to whisper their questions into our ears privately. One young man told me his father, hold on one second, my phone is ringing. His father was molesting him and asked if that was a mental illness. Let me repeat that again because I got disturbed. One young man told me that his father was molesting him and asked if that was mental illness. One young lady asked if her uncle exposing himself inside the home was that mental illness. Our students quietly shared experiences involving inappropriate touching, abuse, trauma, violence, addiction, fear, and emotional instability in the homes. What disturbed me the most was realizing that many of these children had normalized these experiences because of dysfunction, trauma, untreated mental illness, abuse, and emotional suffering had become part of their everyday lives and their environments. In communities where trauma becomes normal, people stop recognizing that there is a crisis. This experience has changed me forever. It showed me that the Virgin Islands was not simply facing a mental health issue. We were facing a generational crisis of untreated trauma, silence, abuse, and emotional pain among our youths. This is why this bill matters. Many mental health educators know that mental health saves lives. My work in the Virgin Islands was also deeply informed by my years of experience with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. In 2010, I began working for NAMI Orlando as a young presenter in the nationally recognized Ending the Silence program. Through that work, I presented in more than 113 schools throughout Orlando and later continued presenting in Gwinnett County, Georgia, until 2017. The Ending the Silence program was created to educate youth about mental health awareness, stigma, reduction, early intervention, and help-seeking behaviors. Research on this program has shown improvements in students' understanding of mental illness, reduced trauma, and increased willingness among young people to seek help. Beyond that research, I witnessed the impact firsthand. I watched students who had been silently struggling finally open up about depression, trauma, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. I watched classrooms become safer spaces for emotional conversations. I watched education begin to break cycles of silence and shame surrounding mental illness. This experience showed me that mental health education in schools is not optional. It is life-saving. And that is exactly why this legislation is necessary for the Virgin Islands. Today, we have made progress. Schools now have mental health counselors in ways they did not when I was growing up, but there's so much more still needed. We need constant mental health education, early intervention programs, trauma-informed school systems, properly trained counselors, accessible treatment resources, and culturally competent support for Virgin Islands families. This bill represents prevention. This bill represents awareness. This bill represents hope. I also stand before you today not only as an advocate, but as someone who has actively worked to help advance mental health legislation in this territory. In 2003, the Georgia General Assembly formally recognized my mental health advocacy and community impact through House Resolution 441 in my name, honoring my efforts in advancing mental health awareness, education, and legislative incentives benefiting the people of the United States, Virgin Islands, and communities beyond. My advocacy efforts helped support the passage of Bill number 31-0134, which focused on funding mental health services for residents in need. Bill number 31-0279, which addressed mental health support and grief for stress counseling training for public school counselors. I also assisted in the legislation related to strengthening mental health intervention laws, including bills number 32-0084 and 32-0085. So today, I am asking the legislature to continue that progress, because untreated mental illness does not impact one individual. It impacts children, families, schools, communities, and future generations. No child should ever have to experience what I experienced at the age of 12 years old. No child should suffer in silence because adults were too uncomfortable to discuss mental health openly. And no family should be left without resources, education, or support. Bill number 36-0133 is more than an education policy. It is the investment into prevention, healing, and the future of the Virgin Islands. I respectfully urge this body to pass Bill number 36-0133. Thank you, Chairman Villet, members of the community, and Senator Potter for allowing me the opportunity to testify today, and for your continued commitment to the mental health and the well-being of the people of the Virgin Islands.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you for sharing your personal story with us. It's quite touching, and sadly it is something that has taken place in a number of households in the Virgin Islands. Going back to your testimony, which was very impactful, you have a sentence that says, you are referring to yourself, we were facing a generational crisis of untreated trauma, silence, abuse, and emotional pain among our youth. And that is taking place right now. But how do you change that if you don't have the adequate measures in place to treat our mental health population, where so many of them just go untreated? So you could have a half intervention in school, or somebody speak to them, but they're going home to the exact same situation, even when it is outlined to someone that there's this issue in the home. There's no program to put them in. How do you deal with that? That's my concern.
It has to start somewhere. It has to start somewhere, and education in our youth is where it begins. The caveat is, if you introduce in the schools and you start teaching coping skills and behavioral skills, at least now when they go home in the environment that they're in, because they can't be removed from the home, you have to teach them how to cope in that environment. And that is, from my experience, how I managed to be so strong-minded, is because I had a strong support system with my grandparents. And if it wasn't for them teaching me coping skills and behavioral skills, I don't think I would have made it.
Okay.
But it has to start in the schools. It has to. We have to start teaching these kids the fundamentals of knowing the different symptoms, knowing what each diagnosis. I hear a lot of the kids now since the
let me ask you a different question.
PTSD.
Dr. Hall, let me ask you a different question. So, and this is not, the concept of the bill I totally understand, and I'm 100% that, hey, this needs to be done, the concept. Is it being done already? I'm not sure. But are we treating our mental health population the way that we're supposed to in the Virgin Islands? Definitely no. Do they have a lot of different options in terms of treatment? Definitely no. So you have a situation in which you detail that a young lady asks if the uncle exposing themselves was a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And I know as a junior high school principal, I had a similar case. And the case was referred that this was happening in the home, and the person that was exposing themselves had a lot of cognitive issues. But the child was never removed, nothing was really ever done. You know, so like you make a complaint, you do this, you do that, and then it stays the same. So now I'm wondering, well, what is the impact on a child if they now get the education, they make a complaint, and then there's no change whatsoever, Dr. Howell? Talk to me about that.
I am concerned about that. I am very concerned about opening these children, especially in St. Croix. I am concerned about opening these children to what these symptoms are, and then they go home and realize that they live with these symptoms, and then now what? Now, how do this child cope knowing that their family member and a lot of the community members around them have a mental illness? Now, normal becomes a mental illness. So now the child feels disassociated because they are normal and their other counterparts and their family members don't seem to be normal. And now, are you going to be making a bigger bully system where people are going to now be able to identify mental illness and symptoms and start yelling at the kids and diagnosing themselves? I am concerned about that. Is there a remedy? I wish there was. Whew.
Has deep-rooted issues, severe trauma as a result of something that they experience, killing of a sibling, the killing of a parent. You believe that this mental health education assists with them being able to deal with that particular situation?
It would if they're teaching them the proper coping and behavioral skills to deal with the situation and understanding that they're not alone. I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen with children is they don't see anybody like them that is a success story telling them their story. Our community is one of those that listen to our peers. If somebody was successful at their age level at overcoming how they're feeling, then they can do it too, and I don't think that they have that example.
So let me ask you a question, because you put your personal story out there. How did you deal with it? How did you cope? Did you have mental health education in school?
I did not. I was just told that my mother was sick. That's it. I didn't know. In my mind, I was like, well, where's the bush tea? Because you all say bush tea fixes everything. Where was the bush tea to bring my mom's mind back? God, my grandmother instilled the love of God and Christianity in me, and that's how I coped.
So your grandmother provided that environment for you to be able to deal with it.
She too was in that same environment. She had to deal with it herself. She didn't have any sort of services either. So it was literally her and I just dealing with this severe situation, and we didn't know that there were any other families on the island that had a child that was schizophrenic. At that time, everybody hid their schizophrenic relative away from the public. So here's my mother for the first time being public, and we got a lot of scrutiny about it. I would like to ask if it's okay, if the Department of Education and Department of Health, do they have presenters at least coming in once a month so that the students can hear real stories?
I'll allow that question. That's a good question.
Dr. Giselle Ramos, Director of Behavioral Health. For real stories, I don't want to put her business out there, but we have Dr. Relinda McCarty, who actually experienced a situation similar, that she is in the schools providing that testimony to the students. So when you say if we have individuals that comes out that to provide testimonies, we actually have the students as well, doing that testimony. But we don't seek individuals to provide that real life testimony unless they, approach us to do so.
Do you think that's a good idea that we need to?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I see this bill as just one tool in the toolbox. It's not going to fix our mental health problem, but it's an opportunity to start with our young people. If change is going to take place, it's going to take place among our young people. If the issue of stigma is going to be eradicated, it's going to have to start with our young people, with us normalizing the discussion of mental health. Just like you won't ridicule somebody who has a broken foot or a broken leg or suffering from cancer, you're not going to ridicule somebody who is suffering from mental disease or mental health challenge. That is what this is really attempting to do, for us to expand on the work that the Department of Health, the Department of Education is currently doing when it comes to mental health exposure to our children, it really expands upon it. It provides our young people with the instruction, with the support, with the understanding of signs and symptoms, with the understanding that if I am suffering from a mental health challenge, I can talk about it. I can seek help. Many of us in our culture, you know, it's not good to talk about your business. So a lot of people, far too many of our people are suffering in silence. And a lot of what we're seeing on the street that looks like crime, you know, is really a manifestation of mental health challenges that have gone unchecked for such a long period of time. So I think this is what the bill really is attempting to do. It's not a cure-all and a fix for everything having to do with mental health, but it's an opportunity, it's a start to begin the conversation, to mandate, to send a message that in the Virgin Islands, we are serious about mental health to the point that we have legislated it. You know, we have legislated mental health instruction in our schools. That's the message we want to send. I want to thank you, Dr. Hall, for your candor and for your very moving testimony. I wanted to ask you a question about your session. You spoke about your St. Croix sessions, and it had to stop because students' disclosures became overwhelming without adequate support systems in place. What happened to those children after you left? You know, were there any sort of referral protocols that were triggered? Any follow-up by school staff? You know, do you know what happened with those students who, you know, who you initially met? I think in 2015.
Yes. Sorry. Immediately after the session ended, we went straight to see the counselors and the principal at that time, and she indicated that is the problem that we have. So it was not brand new hearing what we heard. They had heard it before, but their question was, what do we do? Yeah. And at that time, we asked, are there any mental health counselors? What about, you know, mental health care? And they said, we don't have any counselors, and that's when we passed a bill to have counselors in. So that one issue was rectified. But I want to go on record to say the reason why the National Alliance on Mental Illness program, Ending Illness Silence, was so impactful to the youth is because you had young presenters that were coming into the schools that looked like them, that they could relate to. And now the children felt safe. They felt safe and relatable and not alone. And that opened the door for these children to now do more research, go to their counselors and say, hey, you know, we just had someone come into the classroom that was talking, and I think that I have a problem. And that's a huge step for a child to go to a counselor and go, I have a huge problem, who's been sitting in silence for years. So what if we could implement a program like that in the Virgin Islands where the youths are seeing people who look like them in their community, and that be brought into the curriculum? Because we all know that once we start to be familiar or see something that is relatable, we have all these kids looking up to different other celebrities and stuff that are coming from abroad. But what about our local youths? What about our local community going into the schools and talking to these children firsthand about their experiences? That's what I would propose.
I love it. I think it makes pure sense. I wanted to ask you just a follow-up, and I know my time was called. You've worked with NAMI's Ending the Silence program across 113 plus schools in Florida and Georgia. Compared to those mainland systems, how does the USVI's current mental health infrastructure in terms of treatment facilities, inpatient capacity, community-based services, and school-based support compare? And what is the most critical gap, do you think, that must be addressed for this bill to succeed rather than just create awareness without resolution?
Ooh, that's a compound question. Okay. So in the schools that I went to, they were all underprivileged schools where the stigma was very high for mental illness. There were barely any services available for, just like our community don't have a lot of services available. These are the areas that I was also going into, predominantly African-American schools in low-income areas where mental illness is a stigma. And this program proved to be successful because now the children were now aware of their family issues that were going on. They were more accepting, they were more compassionate, they were more empathetic versus curiosity, concern, and knowledgeable about what they were seeing. Knowledge is power, and knowing that this person at home is dealing with depression and you're teaching the child the symptom of depression, how to cope with some of depression, this leads the child to go into this house now knowing that they have a depressed parent with a whole different set of eyes. They're no longer stressed out wondering what's going on with the parent. Why is the parent acting this way towards me? They're not empathetic and supportive of the parent. And now the child themselves can encourage the parent to go get help. And therefore you're building community support.
Yes, I think that's powerful, and just understanding what I've been experiencing has a name. You know, I'm able to, to recognize something that I didn't recognize before. So
thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Bill number 36-0133, an act amending Title 17, Virgin Islands Code, Chapter 10, Section 111, A in parenthesis, number 1 in parenthesis, providing mental health education and instruction, sponsored by Senator Milton E. Potter, be voted on favorably in this committee, the Committee of Education and Workforce Development, and move to the Committee of Rules and Judiciary for further consideration. I so move.
Second.
Motion made by Senator DeGraff, seconded by Senator Kenneth Gittens. Roll call.
Senator Dwayne M. DeGraff.
Yes.
Senator DeGraff, yay. Senator Kenneth L. Gittens. Senator Gittens, yay. Senator Marie C. James. Senator James, absent. Senator Franklin D. Johnson. Senator Johnson, yay. Senator Carla J. Joseph. Senator Joseph, yay. Senator Avery L. Lewis.
Yes.
Senator Lewis, yay. Senator Kurt A. Viale. Senator Viale, yay. Mr. Chair, you have 6 yay, 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bill number 36, that's 0133, an act amending Title 17, Virgin Islands Code, Chapter 10, Section 111A1, providing mental health education and instruction, has received a favorable vote in this committee and will be sent to the Committee of Rules and Judiciary for further consideration.